We are back here now on the show, on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, to kind of revisit a topic on Kirk Cousins. And obviously now he is on the Atlanta Falcons. That is all wrapped up and sealed. But the issue beforehand, was this negotiation process that was going on between him and the Minnesota Vikings. And after reports, it appeared that, to me, that the biggest issue was going to be the guaranteed money, the long-term deal, and whether or not the Vikings were comfortable with Kirk Cousins after that severe injury to give him a 4-year, 5-year deal after that. And ultimately, they weren't. It led to Kirk Cousins hitting the market, signing a massive 4-year, $180 million deal with the Falcons, $100 million guaranteed for Kirk Cousins. So that's awesome for him. But then it got a little bit weird, awkward, you could say, when the Falcons drafted Michael Penix so high at number 8 overall, and which led to Kirk Cousins reportedly feeling disappointed in his mind because the Falcons didn't really communicate that to him with an adamant amount of time before they ended up doing it. So it's ironic because before that, and this is sort of the main topic of this segment, before that, some reports came out by Sports Illustrated back in May when everything was sort of going down with this, that a reason why Kirk decided to move on, and they made it seem like it was the main reason, it was because Kirk had a discussion with the Minnesota Vikings, and they essentially told them that there was a real possibility that they were going to draft his successor, essentially, in this year's upcoming draft, and that, or they were going to do that even if he decided to re-sign with them. That was essentially what Sports Illustrated was basically saying as a main factor as to why Kirk decided to move on. And it's ironic, right? Because Sports Illustrated was saying that, so he signed with the Falcons, right? But they essentially did the same thing, except they just didn't communicate it to him. They didn't tell him that they were going to do that. So that was the ironic part about it. But now Kirk Cousins appeared on the Athletics Scoop City podcast to sort of explain what really happened and clear up that report by Sports Illustrated, to talk about what really happened, how that conversation went with Kevin O'Connell, specifically the Vikings head coach, and how that was one factor, but it might not have been the deciding factor in how this all played out with Kirk Cousins. You can see it there on your screen, the statement that he said on the Athletics podcast. He said, "I don't think they were ready to go there yet in March. I think the reality is just that they wanted to give themselves that flexibility." And I remember Kevin's words, Kevin O'Connell that is, which I'm not going to hold them to, were, hey, if we sign you back, I would think it's very unlikely that we draft somebody. And after that, he did acknowledge that while Kevin O'Connell did say that if they did re-sign him, they might not, probably not, draft a quarterback early, he did acknowledge the fact, Kirk Cousins did, that things could change very quickly depending on how the offseason played out. So quite the opposite of what Sports Illustrated was saying. You know, Sports Illustrated reported that the Vikings told Kirk that there was a real possibility that even if they did re-sign him, they might still draft a quarterback, but Kirk is saying the opposite. They basically told him if he does re-sign, they're probably not going to do that. So that's one thing. Kind of clearing up the air there on this decision. But like I said, it probably wasn't the biggest deciding factor in all of this. I didn't think it was the biggest factor to Kirk Cousins eventually leaving, because at his stage of his career, where he's playing at, and playing at a high level, to kind of give himself that leverage, he is at a point in his career where guaranteed money means a lot. And of course, guaranteed money is important at any stage of your career, but especially when you're getting older. You're more susceptible to injuries, obviously. As a quarterback, Kirk, not the most athletic guy, is in that situation now. And the guaranteed money was really, to me, why I felt that this was never going to work out. If the Vikings were holding off on it so much, to the point where they got to free agency and nothing was really moving, I just felt that, you know, that's where they were. That's the decision that they made, and it wasn't going to work out. And Kirk similarly saw the same thing kind of playing out in front of him. With this next statement, to just wrap it all up, he said, "It just felt it had been and was going to be basically 1 year, 1 year, 1 year. And I felt, yeah, maybe I do play in Minnesota for another 5 or 6 years, but it's going to be on 1-year contracts. And obviously that's not something that Kirk wants to do at this point in time. And if you think about it, going to that statement on how Kirk kind of revealed that it went down with the Minnesota Vikings, if Kirk agreed to this 1-year deal sort of structure with everything, and that would have been a big ask of the Minnesota Vikings, of Kirk Cousins, if he decided to, to agree with that and go along with that, after having Kevin O'Connell tell him that, yeah, maybe we're not going to draft a quarterback if you do re-sign with us, it's kind of contradicting, because if you're on a 1-year deal, it almost gives the Minnesota Vikings more of an incentive to, still draft that quarterback, even if they do re-sign you, to go against what they were saying, because you're only on a temporary deal. So it opens up the door for them a lot more to still draft a quarterback or still plan for the future, because they're not tied to you for 3 or 4 years. So even though the Vikings were saying one thing, based on their actions and based on what they were offering Kirk, he took Kevin O'Connell's word, but like he said, he wasn't going to hold him to it. And based on what they were offering, you could sort of see that the Vikings weren't really believing exactly what Kevin O'Connell was saying, or they weren't at least planning for it with offering Kirk only 1-year deals. It doesn't scream that they're not going to plan for your future in, the near future. By that being said, by only offering you 1-year deal, they're saying, yeah, we want to keep you. Yeah, you're going to be good for us maybe for a year or so, but we're not really 100% in on you continuing this level for the next 3 or 4 years. So that kind of played out there. And because that was the case, Atlanta seemed like the perfect situation, right? And then we transition now to where we are now. The biggest problem, like I said, was the guaranteed money and the structure of it. I never thought Kirk was going to agree to this 1-year deal, and that's basically what he's saying. But that's why Atlanta was so appetizing to Kirk, and why everybody thought this was a match made in heaven, because they needed a quarterback, they were offering the money, and because they were offering that money, why wouldn't Kirk decide to sign there? And it's not really his fault or his decision that because he signed there, he got all the guaranteed money that he wanted, but the Falcons essentially did the same thing that the Vikings were kind of planning on doing, but just not telling Kirk, essentially. The Falcons signed him. Everybody thinks he's going to be their starter. They didn't tell him what they were really planning, and they drafted Michael Penix anyway. And the Falcons can say as much as they want that they want to be extra safe, or they want to just plan for the future without having to try and go through a quarterback search again. But you can't give a guy like $100 million guaranteed and still draft essentially his successor. It doesn't really make sense with investing so much money in Kirk and still planning for the future that could be 3 or 4 years away. And by that time, Michael Penix might need a contract extension. So we've talked about that enough, but that's really where the whole problem lies, and where Kirk was almost doomed. If he stayed with the Vikings, they were going to look towards the future anyway. And with the Falcons, essentially, they're doing the same thing with him now. So it's weird how it all plays out for Kirk in this situation. But Shots Below the Belt says Kirk Cochains is a phenomenal quarterback. The Atlanta Falcons had to draft a quarterback. They're going to average 10 wins in 2 seasons. So that messes up their draft spot in the next 2 years. Why not draft a quarterback now? I mean, yes, I see what you're saying. Kirk is a phenomenal quarterback and everything. They're going to average 10 wins, in 2 seasons. They're going to be great. But right now, drafting a quarterback, again, it seems to me that the issue with me is the money, right? If you think, Kirk is a great quarterback, but they're going to be all right, basically. They're going to be average to good, pretty good over the next 2 seasons. Yes, you could draft a quarterback after that, especially with Kirk coming off of that severe Achilles injury, right? That makes sense, but at the same time, if that is your plan, and that isn't a bad plan, I can see the logic behind that. I think still you're overpaying by giving Kirk 4 years, $180 million, and guaranteeing him $100 million at that. I mean, you could do it. The Falcons did it. If their plan is only to have Kirk really for 2 years, that's fine. But again, as a fan, I'm not an Atlanta Falcons fan, but if I were, I would think that's a little bit weird to invest so much in Kirk if we're really only planning on keeping him, making him the starter for 2 years. To give him $100 million guaranteed, it's not a waste, but it just seems like it could have been a little too much to give Kirk at this point in time if you're really not feeling that he could go longer than 2 or 3 seasons. But that's just me. Signing Cousins automatically makes the Falcons the favorite to win the NFC South. I agree with that. That's fully right. That's correct. I think they are the favorite probably, even though the Bucs did just win it. They were 9-8, so it's not like they're a team that you could put all your chips into and think that they're gonna run the table or run that division again. The Falcons probably are more talented than they are right now with Kirk Cousins, but if you really believe that and you really believe Kirk is the option going forward, just keep Kirk and write it out with him. Yeah, it could go terribly wrong, but with that being, in your mind, with that being a thought, maybe you just don't offer him that much. And does that change and sway Kirk Cousins' decision on signing with the Falcons? And maybe the Falcons offered him this money to make sure that they got their quarterback, at least for right now. That's a possibility, and that's something I can see, but we're getting into hypotheticals now. Could this affect Kirk's decision of signing with the Falcons if you didn't offer that much? Yes and no. We'll never know. It's already done. It's signed. It's already over with. But, I just have my doubts about it, especially with Michael Penix being more of an older rookie. I just don't want it to be a situation where Kirk actually surprises everybody. He plays very good, longer than people expect. You can't bench him. And then you don't have Michael Penix really giving him enough time to prove that he is that next quarterback. Because the worst case scenario will be if Kirk eventually, stops being Kirk and playing at the level that he's at, and you don't really have enough time to evaluate Michael Penix and throw him in there. Ideally, it could happen like Jordan Love. That's the best case scenario, but the worst is that he's just not ready. He hasn't had enough time to really develop playing real games, and then you're in a real situation where you spend a high draft pick on Michael Penix, Kirk is not at the level you want to anymore, and then you're kind of stuck. But that's down the line. That's where it could end up. We'll see where it goes. The Falcons, they feel pretty confident about it, so we'll just see. They're in a good spot, like you mentioned, to win this year's division, so that's where they'll start, and we'll see where it goes from there. But interesting how Kirk mentioned how it all broke down there with the Minnesota Vikings, that I wanted to bring it up on today's show. But we'll wrap it up there. We'll leave it there at this point in time. And with that, we're going to move on to that previous topic that I mentioned. We're going to talk about James Bradberry suggesting that he move to safety this year in 2024 to show his value to the Philadelphia Eagles. And also coming up, we're going to talk about more of the rankings on the NFL Network's top 100 player rankings, this time looking at 40 through 31, giving my thoughts on it to end the show. So we'll be right back after this break. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.